At 16, the teenager sat in the courtroom with a smile that silenced the entire room. While other kids his age were preoccupied with math tests or weekend football games, Ethan Bennett lived in thoughts so cold and twisted they kept investigators awake for months. He believed youth was a shield that would spare him from consequences, that the legal system would see him as a lost child rather than a murderer. But the dried blood on the hem of his pants and the perfect fingerprint on the grip of a Glock 9mm sealed his fate. Those small pieces of evidence were enough to convince the jury that some monsters wear the face of a teenager, and this monster needed to be locked away before it could smile again. How could a child become the killer of his own family? And what made him smile when reminded of the crimes he committed? These questions haunted the city of Waco for years after that summer night. Questions born from a bloody, senseless act that challenged both reason and human faith. Because this crime didn't stem from impulsive anger or youthful recklessness. It was the product of a coldness nurtured over time, a brilliant but empty mind where emotions had long since died. And on that night, when 3 gunshots rang out in a quiet residential neighborhood, America caught its first glimpse of the most terrifying thing within itself. The silence of a soul devoid of humanity. Before diving into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated on the latest cases. On the night of July 21, 2004, darkness fell over the quiet Maple Hill neighborhood in Waco, Texas, carrying the sweltering heat typical of a southern summer. Lawns were neatly trimmed, still under the faint yellow glow of streetlights, each house a small fortress of warmth and routine against the oppressive night. In a modest 2-story home at the end of the street, Mark Bennett, 45, an aerospace engineer, was winding down from a long day's work. The scent of dish soap mingled with the lingering smell of grilled meat in the air. Karen Bennett, 41, his wife, a dedicated librarian, was folding a stack of books she'd brought home from the library, while their 10-year-old daughter, Emily, slept soundly, clutching her worn teddy bear she never parted with. That house, like every other night, was a symbol of peace. The TV fading to a hum, the living room light still on, and the final movements of a family drifting into sleep. But that peace was an illusion, a fragile veneer hiding the darkness lurking beneath. No anger was reported, no threats, no warning signs. At 11:46 p.m., 3 sharp gunshots tore through the Waco night. A 4th followed seconds later, short, crisp, and chillingly cold. No screams or breaking glass were heard, only the neighbor's dog barking briefly before falling silent. For a few minutes, the house remained lit, utterly still, as if time itself had frozen. No signs of forced entry, no stolen items, just absolute silence. At 6:20 a.m., the first rays of Texas sunlight slipped through the curtains, revealing an open garage door and Mark's white pickup truck still in the driveway. Ruth Miller, the neighbor across the street, called 911 after knocking repeatedly with no response. The first record of the case was logged at 6:24 a.m., reporting no response from the Bennett family. Within 15 minutes, 2 Waco Police Department patrol cars screeched into Maple Hill, sirens shattering the morning calm. In a place where people still left their doors unlocked at night and believed violence only existed on the evening news, Waco lost its sense of safety forever. When McLennan County Police arrived at the scene at 6:38 a.m., the Texas summer sun blazed down on Maple Hill, but it couldn't dispel the chill creeping through every investigator. 2 patrol cars parked in front of 117 Maple Hill, red and blue lights reflecting off the glowing windows. A young officer knocked one last time before pushing the slightly ajar wooden door with his team. No response, only the metallic tang of blood and the acrid smell of burnt coffee. In the living room, Mark Bennett lay slumped on the sofa, eyes wide open, a handgun on the floor inches from his hand. A bullet hole pierced his left temple, blood soaking the beige carpet in a dark, shapeless stain. On the coffee table in front of him, a half-drunk beer still fizzed, and the TV remote lay on the floor, the screen frozen on a late-night news broadcast. Police sealed off the area and called in forensics immediately. Ranger David Lawson, a tall man in his 40s with the cold eyes of someone who'd seen too many deaths, was dispatched from headquarters to lead the investigation. As Lawson entered the house, he paused for a moment, took a deep breath, and moved past the living room, down a short hallway to the kitchen. There, Karen Bennett was found slumped by the dining table, head tilted to one side, her right hand still clutching a shard of a broken blue ceramic mug. Spilled coffee, mixed with a thin trail of blood from her shoulder, dried to a dark brown. No signs of a struggle, no overturned objects, just the absolute silence of a deliberate, precise killing. Upstairs in her bedroom, Emily Bennett lay curled in her blankets, her blood-stained teddy bear in her arms. A single bullet had passed through her chest. She didn't seem to have woken up. Forensics photographed, marked and measured bullet angles. Everything indicated the shooter knew the layout of every room, every hallway in the house. Lawson stood on the staircase, looking at the blood-stained floor, and wrote in his notebook, "No break-in, no forced entry, no theft. A clean crime." He looked up, his gaze lingering on a family photo on the wall. 3 smiling faces at a picnic by Lake Waco, just a few miles away. By 7:30 a.m., Maple Hill was swarming with police, ambulances, and stunned neighbors standing behind yellow tape. A few women clutched Bibles, praying hand in hand. An older man removed his hat, head bowed, as bodies were carried out. On the local radio, the morning news opened with a trembling female anchor, "Family of 3 slain in quiet neighborhood." Waco had never experienced anything like this. No one could fathom why a kind, private, well-liked family could vanish in a single night. The pastor from St. Mary's Church arrived at the scene, telling a reporter, "Mark was always ready to help. He even fixed my roof once." Karen was gentle, and Emily was so well behaved. "If evil can come for them, none of us are safe." When asked about the investigation, Lawson said curtly, "The shooter knew everything in that house." He closed his notebook, watching the last ambulance leave, leaving the house empty, bathed in morning sunlight, and an overwhelming sense of unease. In the silence, Waco began to wonder, if not a stranger, who could fire 4 shots without any of those 3 people uttering a word. The investigation stretched into noon. Under the scorching Texas sun, Ranger David Lawson leaned against his patrol car, eyes fixed on the preliminary report handed to him by forensics. No signs of forced entry, no broken windows, all locks intact. Everything was arranged so neatly, it felt almost emotionless, as if the shooter knew every step to take in that house. One detail made Lawson pause longer than usual: a faint, size 9 shoe print in dust on the hallway floor leading to the kitchen. Too small to be marks, and it didn't match the boots of the paramedics or police who entered the scene. A seemingly trivial detail, but it pointed to the one thing that couldn't be ignored: someone from inside the house. The tech team continued collecting fingerprints from the gun safe in the study. Only Mark Bennett's prints, and one other set, matched a family member in the records: Ethan Bennett, Mark's 16-year-old son. Dust on the safe suggested it had been opened shortly before the shooting, possibly within the last 24 hours. The safe wasn't forced open, the code was entered correctly. Lawson went still, set the crime scene photos down, and looked at the deputy. "Mark and Karen had a son, right?" "Yes, Ethan. High school kid, plays on the Waco High basketball team. Said he was at a friend's house last night. A kid named Kyle Roberts." Lawson nodded slightly, his eyes darkening. "So only one person left that house alive." Mark's white pickup, per the report, was no longer at the house. Lawson immediately requested a check of neighbors' security cameras. At 121 Maple Hill, a camera captured a pickup, matching Mark's leaving the neighborhood at 1:17 a.m. The driver's face wasn't clear, but the figure was tall and lanky, moving slowly, calmly, not like someone fleeing. At the same time, GPS data from the pickup, retrieved by the tech team, showed it stopped 2 miles from the scene, near a vacant lot on Woodway Drive, at 1:30 a.m., before turning back. The timing matched the camera footage. Lawson glanced at his watch, jotting in his notebook: 1:17 left house, 1:30 stopped, returned. A short, Deliberate trip, not the actions of someone in panic. That afternoon, Lawson returned to the Bennett house, quietly walking the sealed-off staircase where forensics still marked evidence. He opened his dark leather notebook and wrote a single line: "No theft. Only the sun." As he stepped into the yard, neighbors still gathered behind the fence, eyes following Lawson's cowboy hat. A middle-aged man approached, voice hoarse with emotion. "Ethan, he was a good kid, quiet. But lately, I saw him looking at his dad with this strange look, like something heavy was on his mind." Lawson didn't respond. He nodded, tucked his pen into his pocket, and returned to his car. In his mind, the pieces were falling into place, terrifyingly so. A 16-year-old boy, intelligent, who knew his father's safe code, who had used a gun for target practice. A family with no enemies, no signs of conflict outside the walls of this house. At Waco Police Department headquarters, Lawson held an urgent meeting with the investigative team. Photos, timelines, fingerprints, and shoe prints were laid out on a whiteboard. "Everything points to one person," he said, voice low and steady. "Not a stranger, not a thief, not a random lunatic, but the only one who knew this house down to every brick." A young officer spoke up. "But sir, if it's the kid, why return to the scene? Why not run?" Lawson looked at him, his gray-blue eyes darkening. "Because he didn't think he had to. People who believe they're smarter than everyone else stick around to watch the chaos unfold." He stood, closed his notebook, and issued a firm order. "Bring Ethan Bennett to Waco PD, now." Outside, the Texas sun burned red, scorching the town, reflecting off the words on Lawson's notebook cover, "Bennett case." And beneath the final line, one name was underlined in black ink. That afternoon, as the Texas sun still cast a harsh golden glow over the Waco Police Department parking lot, Ethan Bennett walked into the station in a wrinkled gray t-shirt and dark jeans. He moved slowly, hands in his pockets, eyes showing no trace of fear. Ranger David Lawson watched, noting the chilling calm in the 16-year-old's gait, not the walk of someone who'd just lost their entire family the night before. "Thanks for coming, Ethan," Lawson said, as the boy was ushered into a small interrogation room, the pale fluorescent light reflecting off his expressionless face, no trembling. The door closed. Lawson sat across from him, opened his notebook, and spoke softly, evenly. "Where'd you sleep last night?" Ethan looked straight ahead, lips curling slightly, as if the question were a joke. "At Ryan's house, my friend. We played games late and crashed." Lawson jotted a note, not looking up. "Ryan Roberts, right?" "Yeah. When'd you get home?" "This morning, probably around 7. Ryan's mom drove me." The answers came quickly, smoothly, as if rehearsed. But Lawson knew the Maple Hill camera caught the white pickup leaving the Bennett house at 1:17 a.m., not 7 a.m. He didn't react, just shifted gears. "Heard anything about what happened at your house?" Ethan looked at the table, fingers tapping lightly. "Yeah," a detective said. "They're dead." A long pause. Lawson waited for a reaction. Ethan only exhaled softly, then looked up. "Worrying about them won't help now." The response made Lawson pause his pen, look up, and meet the boy's eyes. No anger, no trembling, just a chilling indifference. When the investigator left the room, Lawson circled the table, peering through the one-way glass. "Nothing in his eyes," he said to the deputy. "No fear, no regret, just watching." A forensic tech knocked, holding a small plastic bag, Ethan's jeans, with a faint dried brown stain on the right hem. "Blood. Take a sample. Send it to the lab now," Lawson ordered. The teenager was asked to change clothes while police took the evidence. Ethan didn't ask why, only gave a faint smile when Lawson said, "We need to verify some details, you understand," he replied. "Sure, I've got nothing to hide." When the preliminary results came back from the tech lab, every piece began to fall into place. The blood matched Mark Bennett's blood type, and the mud on the hem of the pants matched the soil collected near Woodway Drive, where the truck's GPS showed it stopped at 1:30 a.m. Lawson returned to the interrogation room, set the file on the table, and stayed silent for a few seconds before speaking. Ryan said you left his house around 10:30. Neighbors saw your dad's truck leave the house over an hour later. Want to revise your statement? Ethan leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing slightly, voice steady. We might have mixed up the time. I was tired, probably got it wrong. Lawson stared at him for a long moment, then said softly, You know, I've met people who just lost their family. They tremble, they cry, they ask me why. But you, Ethan, you just sit there, like you're watching a movie you already know the ending to. Ethan smiled, a thin, almost defiant smile. Maybe I'm just not like the people you've met before. Lawson closed his notebook, took a deep breath. Yeah, and that's the scariest thing. As night fell over Waco, Ethan Bennett was detained at the McLennan County Juvenile Facility on charges related to the deaths of Mark, Karen, and Emily Bennett. Outside, red and blue police lights still reflected off the station's windows, while in Lawson's notebook, beneath the final line, he added one more sentence. No fear, no remorse, just watching. Monday morning, Waco's sky was gray and overcast, as if dusted with a thin layer of ash. In the McLennan County Sheriff's Department's forensic lab, the final results were printed, each thin sheet rustling. The first line of the report made Ranger David Lawson stand still for a few seconds. DNA from blood on Ethan Bennett's pants matches victim Mark Bennett 100%. All doubt was gone. No more guesses, no more maybes. The 16-year-old, who walked into the interrogation room with a blank stare and a faint smile, carried the evidence of his crime on his body. 2 days later, a search team was ordered to comb Riverbank Road, where the pickup's GPS showed it stopped in the early hours of July 21st. Under the old wooden bridge, spanning a dry ditch, an officer found a small metal object covered in moss. When lifted, it was still heavy and cold. A Glock 9mm, serial number intact, registered to Mark Bennett. Forensics confirmed the only fingerprints on the grip, besides Mark's, belonged to Ethan. Inside, 4 rounds had been fired. 3 were found at the scene. The 4th was lodged in Emily's bedroom mattress. Lawson said nothing as he held the final report. He folded it, placed it on the desk, and looked out the window toward the McLennan County Courthouse in the distance. That kid, he said quietly, planned everything like an adult, but stayed calm like nothing mattered. The investigators compiled all the evidence, fingerprints on the gun safe. Ethan Bennett. GPS data from the pickup, left the house at 1:17 a.m., stopped at Riverbank at 1:30 a.m., returned to Maple Hill at 1:45 a.m. Neighbor's camera confirmed matching times. Friend statements, Ethan left Ryan's house at 10:30 p.m. Never returned. Everything aligned perfectly, a cold, precise sequence of actions, with no mistakes except the bloodstain on his pants. On July 28th, the Bennett versus State of Texas case file was sent to the county prosecutor's office. Maria Dorsey, a 40-something prosecutor known for her calm demeanor and razor-sharp voice, was assigned to lead the case. After reading the nearly 300-page file, she looked up at Lawson. No motive, no emotion, no remorse. A kid colder than any adult killer. Lawson nodded, voice hoarse. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he wanted others to know it too. The news spread faster than any other story in Texas that year. The Waco Tribune-Herald ran a bold headline, Boy Genius, Triple Killer. Ethan had been an honor student, a science club member, described by teachers as bright, calm, quiet. The story of a teen genius turned cold-blooded killer stunned the state. National TV covered it, cable channels dissected psychological motives, and online, thousands argued. Was he born a monster, or did family pressure create him? Waco, a city once peaceful after the Bennett massacre, was now deeply divided. Half called for the death penalty, arguing someone who killed his parents and sister doesn't deserve to live. The other half pleaded for mercy, emphasizing that Ethan was only 16, needing redemption more than destruction. St. Mary's Church hung a banner, "Pray for the lost souls and for the soul gone astray." In the prosecutor's office, Maria Dorsey met with the investigative team. "We need to establish two things," she said, tapping the table. 1. He was fully aware of his actions. 2. This wasn't an accident or a spur-of-the-moment reaction. This was a plan. She pointed to a large board, a timeline from 10:30 p.m. to 1:45 a.m., with arrows connecting each event. He left his friend's house, opened the safe, took the gun, killed 3 people, drove to dispose of the weapon, and returned to sleep like nothing happened. That's not anger, that's calculation. The court-appointed defense attorney Craig Wallace accessed the file but declined to comment to the press. Meanwhile, TV news repeatedly aired footage of Ethan being escorted from the station, his eyes cold and expressionless. Outside, crowds holding "Justice for the Bennetts" signs shouted as police cars drove by. On August 3rd, Prosecutor Dorsey formally charged Ethan Bennett with 3 counts of first-degree murder, requesting he be tried as an adult. The case was deemed the biggest trial in Texas for 2004. Lawson closed the file, sat in his car, and looked out at the sunlit street. On the radio, they spoke of a terrifyingly intelligent boy, of a town that lost its innocence. But he, the first to see those empty eyes, only muttered, "If this is the future, it's terrifying." In the distance, the McLennan County Courthouse prepared for the trial, and in the defendant's seat soon to come, Ethan Bennett, the only surviving son of that family, would face justice, still with that calm face, those cold eyes from the morning his parents' bodies were found. On November 15, 2004, Waco's air held a rare autumn chill. The McLennan County Courthouse was packed, reporters crowded the back rows, camera lenses aimed at the double doors where the defendant would enter. Outside, crowds gathered around the courthouse lawn, some holding signs demanding justice for the Bennetts, others pleading for mercy for the lost 16-year-old. At 8:32 a.m., Ethan Bennett was escorted in. He wore a white shirt, a light gray jacket, hair neatly combed, his face chillingly calm. As the doors opened, cameras flashed relentlessly. Ethan glanced at them, lips twitching into a faint smile, not from fear, but as if stepping onto a stage where he was the centerpiece. A deputy beside him looked away, avoiding his gaze. At the prosecution's table, Maria Dorsey stood. Her dark suit and firm voice instantly drew every eye. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began. "We are here today not to judge an accident, but to confront a deliberate, cold, and indefensible act. Ethan Bennett, 16 years old, shot and killed his parents and sister as they slept. Not for money, not out of hatred, but for one reason alone: he wanted silence." Her words echoed through the room, cutting through murmurs. A woman sobbed, covering her face. At the victim's family bench, Jacob Miller, Karen's brother, bowed his head, trembling. "He called my sister Mom for 16 years, he whispered, and then shot her while she held her coffee cup." Maria continued, her voice steady, each word clear. "We have DNA evidence, blood from the victim on the defendant's pants. We have the Glock 9mm found under the riverbank bridge, bearing the defendant's fingerprints. We have GPS data, camera footage, and friends' statements, all matching down to the minute. Ethan Bennett planned, calculated, and executed this with the calm of an adult. But more importantly, he showed no remorse. Not a tear, not an apology." Across the table, defense attorney Craig Wallace sat still, hands clasped. He knew Dorsey was painting the image of a demon child, and he'd have to counter that wave of outrage. But when he glanced at Ethan, he saw the boy sitting upright, eyes cold, watching Maria as if listening to a presentation about someone else. No reaction, no anger, no sadness, just observing. Dorsey closed her opening with a line that silenced the courtroom. "There are cases where we search for reasons, but sometimes what we face has no reason, only absolute emptiness. And today, ladies and gentlemen, that emptiness takes the form of a teenager named Ethan Bennett." A stifled sob broke from the back row. An elderly woman, Karen's aunt, collapsed into her husband's shoulder. Ethan glanced at them, no pity, no guilt, just a slight tilt of his head, as if curiously observing their reaction to his actions. When Judge Robert Haynes struck his gavel for a 10-minute recess, the room's air felt thick. A Dallas Morning News reporter scribbled. He smiled when called a killer. Meanwhile, Maria Dorsey sat, exhaled softly, her eyes still on Ethan. She knew this wasn't just a case. It was a confrontation between humanity and nothingness. Outside, St. Mary's church bells rang faintly. They said it was a prayer for the 3 Bennett souls. But in that room filled with flashing lights and judgmental stares, only one person seemed deaf to it all. Ethan Bennett, sitting on the fragile line between youth and crime, between human and monster. As the trial continued that afternoon, Texas sunlight slanted through the tall courtroom windows, stretching across the old wooden floor of McLennan County. The air was heavy. Everyone knew the next part would be Maria Dorsey's testimony, what she called undeniable evidence. Maria stood, adjusted her microphone, her voice clear and firm. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today I will present a chain of physical evidence, not speculation, not emotion, but cold, hard truth. She held up a large board, images from the Bennett crime scene. The frames were arranged in sequence, blood stains on the carpet, the Glock 9mm, Ethan's jeans. This is the blood found on the hem of the defendant's pants, she said evenly. Confirmed by the McLennan Forensic Institute to match Mark Bennett's DNA. Error rate 0.0001%. No mistake possible. A forensic technician was called, confirming Ethan's fingerprints on the Glock's grip and the safe's handle where the gun was stored. Next, Maria played footage from a neighbor's camera. Mark's white pickup leaving the Bennett house at 1:17 a.m., matching the GPS data. At Riverbank Road, she continued. The truck stopped at 1:30 a.m., the exact time the gun was dumped under the bridge. When questioned, the defendant claimed he was asleep at Ryan Roberts' house all night. That statement was entirely false. She paused, looking directly at Ethan. He sat motionless, hands clasped, eyes following her, like he was attending a history lecture. To give you insight into the defendant's mindset, Maria said, I'd like to read an excerpt from his first interrogation, recorded by Ranger David Lawson. She opened the file, her voice steady but chillingly resonant. Ethan, why did you take your dad's gun? I didn't take it. It was there, and I needed it. Needed it for what? For silence. They talked all the time. They argued, told me how I had to live. I couldn't take it anymore. And you thought shooting them would make things quieter, and you see, it did. The courtroom fell silent, only the faint sound of a reporter's pen dropping. At the victim's bench, several people sobbed openly. Maria lowered the file, looking straight at the jury. This isn't the confession of a scared child. This is the declaration of a cold mind, fully aware of its actions and confident in the outcome. Ethan Bennett didn't kill in anger. He killed with calculation and contempt. She turned to a photo of the Glock, pointing at it. And do you know the most horrific part? After killing his parents and sister, he tidied up, turned off the TV, washed his hands, and went back to sleep like nothing happened. A man in the audience stood, shouting, "Monster," before being escorted out by police. Ethan glanced over, lips twitching into a fleeting smile, almost reflexive. Maria saw it. She paused, locking eyes with that face, her gaze burning under the lights. He smiles when hearing about his own crimes, she said, voice lowering. A 16-year-old colder than any adult killer I've ever met. She stepped closer to the prosecution table, closing the file. Ladies and gentlemen, she said slowly, each word deliberate. This isn't just a case about a family's death. This is the crime of a child who thought he was God, who believed he had the right to decide who lives and who stays silent forever. As the word God left her lips, Ethan looked up, his eyes glinting with an odd spark of interest. Then he smiled, not broadly, just a thin curve at the corner of his mouth, but enough to freeze the courtroom. Maria paused for a beat, saying no more. In the thick air of outrage and horror, the judge's gavel struck. Sharp, court is recessed for 15 minutes. Maria returned to her seat, took a deep breath, and looked down at the file, its edges creased from her trembling hands. She knew, for the jury, this wasn't just about trying a juvenile offender. It was a far more terrifying question, Could evil be born from the very peace of a family home? And across the table, Ethan Bennett sat still, smiling faintly, as if the answer no longer mattered. On the third morning of the trial, gray light filtered through the courtroom windows, casting a cold glow over the long benches where defense attorney James Caldwell stood to speak. A middle-aged man, with graying hair and a calm, gravelly voice, he'd defended many young defendants in tough cases. He glanced at Ethan, still sitting upright, hands clasped, face expressionless. Caldwell nodded slightly, as if asking permission, then stepped to the podium. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, voice slow and rough. "Today, we don't deny the tragedy. 3 people are dead, and the only one left is a teenager, a child. But I ask you to remember, before he was a killer, Ethan Bennett was a victim." A wave of murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Caldwell opened his briefcase, pulling out a thick file. He held it up. "This is Ethan's school record, psychological evaluations, and statements from his counselor at Waco High. They all show Ethan lived in an environment of intense pressure and emotional abuse." He looked up at the jury, voice rising. His father, Mark Bennett, was strict to the point of cruelty. He controlled every grade, every minute of sleep. Once, when Ethan got a B in math, Mark made him sleep in the garage for 2 nights. And his mother, Karen, that gentle woman, stayed silent. That silence, ladies and gentlemen, can be crueler than violence. Maria Dorsey frowned, jotting a quick note. Caldwell continued. A report from psychologist Dr. Helen Ward, who evaluated Ethan after his arrest, concluded he has borderline personality disorder with signs of severe depression and impaired emotional regulation in a repressive environment. He didn't kill out of malice, but because he was pushed to the breaking point. A 16-year-old, alone, scared, unheard. He set the file on the prosecution table, voice softening. "If you've ever been a parent, or seen a child go quiet out of fear, please understand. Sometimes that silence is a cry for help." A few jurors nodded slightly, some eyes wavering. Caldwell noticed. He walked slowly to the defendant's table, placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, and said softly, "Ethan isn't the demon the media has painted. He's the product of a broken family, of violence hidden beneath a perfect facade, and our system, the ones meant to help him, failed him." In a rare moment, Ethan turned to look at Caldwell. His eyes, cold and gray as metal, showed no emotion. Then he spoke softly, just loud enough for Caldwell to hear, "Don't call me a victim." Caldwell froze, blinking slightly. But he didn't respond, only squeezed Ethan's shoulder lightly before returning to the podium. "Ethan Bennett doesn't deny responsibility," he continued. "But you must understand that this is a deeply traumatized child, not a calculated killer. He needs healing, not destruction." He ended with a voice full of emotion. "Justice isn't just about punishment, it's about understanding. If we refuse to see the child in the criminal, are we still human?" As he sat, the room fell silent. Only the steady tapping of Maria Dorsey's pen broke the quiet. She stood slowly, approaching the podium. Her face was calm, but her voice was icy. "Your Honor, I respect Mr. Caldwell's efforts. But let me remind you, no one forced Ethan Bennett to pull the trigger. No one stood behind him, no threats, no danger. Just a voluntary choice to kill his father, mother, and sister in their sleep." She lifted her head, looking straight at the jury, then turned to Ethan. He didn't snap, didn't lose control. He calculated every step, every shot, then cleaned the scene. That's not the act of a victim. That's the act of someone who gave himself the right to decide life and death. Maria took a step forward, her voice lowering, commanding, "Mr. Caldwell speaks of a wounded child. I see a boy who thinks he's God, and ladies and gentlemen, even God doesn't forgive that." Her words cut through the air like a blade. Some in the room sobbed. Caldwell bowed his head, silent. Ethan sat still, sunlight from the window illuminating half his face, his lips curving into a faint, ambiguous smile. Whether disdain, mockery, or simply amusement. Judge Haynes struck his gavel, ending the day's arguments. But as everyone rose, Maria kept watching that face. The face of a child just called God, smiling as if he believed he deserved the title. Day 4 of the trial. The air in the McLennan County Courthouse grew heavier than ever. Every seat was filled. Reporters crowded the hallway. Judge Haynes struck his gavel, voice hoarse. The court continues the trial of State of Texas versus Ethan Bennett. Call the first witness. Witness number 1 was a lanky blonde teenager, awkward in a white dress shirt. He introduced himself, Ryan Roberts, Ethan's classmate, and the friend Ethan claimed to have stayed with the night of the crime. He swallowed hard, hands gripping the edge of the witness stand. Ryan, prosecutor Maria Dorsey asked, "How long have you known Ethan?" "About 2 years. We took physics together." "Did you ever hear Ethan say anything that worried you?" Ryan looked down, voice trembling. "Yeah, once during a study group, Ethan said he wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone." The courtroom buzzed. The judge struck his gavel for order. "You thought he was joking, right?" Maria pressed. "Yeah, I laughed at the time, but Ethan didn't laugh. He just looked at me and said quietly, 'Some people live who don't deserve to, Ryan.'" A sharp gasp came from the victim's family bench. Ryan's eyes reddened. "If I'd known he was serious," he choked, "I wouldn't have let him leave that night." The second witness was Helen Ward, an English teacher at Waco High who taught Ethan for 2 years. She wore a beige cardigan, her face tired but her eyes resolute. "He was brilliant," she said slowly, "but there was something different. I've never seen a student write such flawless essays about the meaninglessness of morality." Maria asked, "Can you elaborate?" Helen nodded, pulling out an old paper. "This is from his sophomore year. Laws exist because humans are weak. Without sin, no one would need justice. When I asked why he thought that, Ethan looked at me and said, 'Have you ever seen the strong ask permission to do what they want?'" The room went silent. Helen took a deep breath, her voice faltering. "His eyes scared me, like I was talking to someone who didn't believe in right or wrong." The third witness was David Moore, a neighbor across from the Bennetts for 15 years. He limped to the stand, eyes deep with wrinkles. "I knew that family," he said, voice rough. "Mark was good, hard-working. Karen was kind. But that boy Ethan," he paused, taking a deep breath. Something wasn't right. "One June afternoon, I saw him sitting on the porch, staring into the house through the window for nearly an hour, motionless. When I asked, 'You looking for someone?' he just smiled and walked away. I thought he was daydreaming. Now, I realize that look was a stranger staring at his own family." Maria didn't ask more. She nodded, thanked him, and let him step down. The air grew thicker, as if each witness's words carved deeper into the image of a child with no humanity left. Finally, the fourth witness was called, Walter Graham, Karen Bennett's father, Ethan's grandfather. The room fell utterly silent as he entered, hands trembling on his cane. Sunlight caught his white hair. He looked at Ethan for a long time before speaking, voice hoarse. "I taught him to shoot. When he was 10, we went to a hunting camp at Red River. The boy was focused, calm, hit the target first try. I was proud. I told Karen, 'You've got a great kid.'" He paused, swallowing hard, eyes red. I never thought those hands would end his own family. Maria waited, then asked softly, "Did you ever notice anything unusual about Ethan, Mr. Graham?" He looked down, hands shaking on his cane. When his dad scolded him, he never cried. He just stood there, staring at whoever was yelling, like he was measuring something. "Once I told Karen that look scared me, but she just laughed, said he was just a smart kid." He turned to Ethan again, voice breaking. He was smart, but smarts didn't save his soul. At the defendant's table, Ethan sat still, hands clasped on his lap, eyes fixed on his grandfather. No anger, no emotion, just absolute silence. As Graham left the stand, Maria closed her file, saying softly, "Your Honor, 4 witnesses, classmate, teacher, neighbor and family, described the same thing. Ethan Bennett didn't act on impulse. He was a cold, detached child, obsessed with the power of death. Judge Haynes nodded, jotting a brief note. Witnesses confirmed deliberate behavior, detached psyche, lack of empathy. As the jury left their seats, their eyes passed over Ethan. Some looked away, others lingered, searching for a hint of remorse. But all they saw was a calm face, lips slightly curved, as if Ethan were listening to a story about a complete stranger, not himself. Day 5 of the trial, the air in the McLennan County Courthouse was thick with tension, every breath heavy. The room was packed, everyone knowing today would be the direct questioning. Ethan Bennett would face prosecutor Maria Dorsey. The teenager took the stand, walking upright. Gray eyes cold, head unbowed. Police removed his cuffs. Ethan adjusted his collar and gave a faint smile. Dozens of camera lenses turned toward him, flashes bursting like fireworks in the night. Maria Dorsey approached slowly, her voice clear in the silent room. Ethan, do you understand why you're here? Because people want me to answer questions they already have answers for. Ethan replied, voice calm, eyes never leaving her. Maria nodded, stepping closer. All right, then I'll ask directly. Do you regret it? Ethan was silent for a few seconds, then tilted his head, a slow smile creeping across his lips. Regret? He repeated, voice light, as if pondering a foreign concept. Regret is for the weak. His words froze the room. A woman sobbed. A reporter later wrote, each word from him was like a cold blade, not because of its cruelty, but because he fully believed it. Maria stayed composed, though her hands gripped the file until her knuckles whitened. The weak? She asked slowly. Are you talking about your mother, your 10-year-old sister? Ethan met her eyes, unblinking. I'm talking about anyone who thinks they have to bow to emotions. I'm not weak. They said that about my dad too, the man who taught me not to cry, not to tremble. I just learned his lesson. A wave of outrage swept the room. A man shouted, "Monster," before police escorted him out. Maria took a breath, suppressing her emotions, and pressed on. Do you think you're a good person, Ethan? He shrugged. I think I'm honest. People like lies because they're easier to forgive. I just tell the truth. Maria stepped closer, her voice sharp as a blade. Honest? Then be honest. Ethan, why did you do it? Why kill them? Ethan leaned slightly into the stand, head raised, voice steady and eerily smooth. Because I was tired. Tired of their voices. Tired of their questions, their advice, their pitying looks. They didn't understand that sometimes silence is the only thing that makes you feel free. And that night, I just wanted to be free. Caldwell, the defense attorney, shot up immediately. Ethan, stop answering. He looked at the judge, voice urgent. Your Honor, my client. But Ethan raised a hand lightly, cutting him off. He turned to Caldwell, offering an almost gentle smile. It's fine, James. I like talking to them. Then he looked back at Maria, his eyes glinting with a strange excitement. They're afraid of silence, because in silence, everyone has to hear themselves. Maria stood still, not responding. She stared at the teenager before her, a young face, a calm voice, and a mind she knew was beyond saving. Who do you think you're talking to? She asked, voice low, dry as the wind. Ethan tilted his head. To people who think they can understand what they'd never dare to do. Caldwell put a hand to his forehead, muttering, God, the kid's burning himself. But Ethan kept going, slow and clear. I don't need forgiveness. Forgiveness is a way to lull yourself to sleep. Me, I'm awake. His words echoed through the room, mingling with the scratch of pens and the heavy breathing of those watching. A reporter scribbled a note. No one in that room breathed easy. Even when telling the truth, he made you feel like you were staring into the abyss of humanity. Maria gripped her file, then said softly, You say regret is weakness, but I'll tell you, Ethan, regret is what keeps us human. Ethan leaned toward the microphone, voice low, almost a whisper, then maybe I was never human. His words froze the courtroom. Caldwell stood raising a hand. This testimony ends here, Your Honor. Judge Haynes struck his gavel hard, calling a recess. But as everyone rose, Ethan Bennett sat still, lips slightly curved, eyes following the departing crowd. Afternoon sunlight through the window lit half his face, cold, expressionless, and strangely, terrifyingly serene. Day 6 of the trial, the air in the McLennan County Courthouse carried a strange exhaustion. The press had quieted, the audience no longer angry. Now all watched Ethan Bennett like he was a rare creature, half human, half shadow. Each morning, he entered the courtroom calmly, white shirt crisp, faint smile practiced, as if he'd memorized every gaze fixed on him. On the 6th day, forensic psychologist Dr. Harold McKinnon was called as a prosecution witness. With 30 years analyzing criminal behavior in Texas, he'd worked on many notorious cases. As he took the stand, the room went silent. Maria Dorsey approached, voice low but clear. "Dr. McKinnon, you evaluated the defendant, Ethan Bennett. Can you share your conclusions?" The doctor adjusted his glasses, glancing briefly at Ethan before answering. "Ethan Bennett has an IQ in the very superior range, 142, per the Stanford-Binet test. He has exceptional logical and analytical skills, but almost no capacity for guilt or empathy." Maria nodded. "Can you elaborate?" "We call this early-stage antisocial personality disorder. Ethan shows no fear, no remorse, and no emotional response when discussing his crimes. Instead, he observes others' reactions to his actions, as if conducting a social experiment." The jury sat stunned. At the defendant's table, Ethan remained still, lips faintly curved, eyes glinting with vague amusement, as if the doctor were describing someone else, yet someone he aspired to be. Maria stepped closer, asking, "Does Ethan understand right from wrong?" McKinnon replied firmly, very clearly. "But to him, right or wrong doesn't matter. What matters is power, control. He wants to see others lose control, tremble, because it makes him feel alive." A soft murmur spread through the room. Maria glanced at Ethan. What was he doing? Still smiling. A thin, polite, almost charming smile, but his eyes were empty as a mirror. During cross-examination, Caldwell stood, trying to keep his voice steady. "Dr. McKinnon," he said, "you say Ethan lacks empathy, but could that stem from childhood trauma, from misguided parenting?" McKinnon shook his head. "I think environment was only a catalyst. What makes Ethan dangerous is how he relishes his guilt." During our interview, when I asked about his parents, he said, "They don't talk anymore. I gave them peace." And then he smiled. No one in the room spoke. Pens scratched. A few in the audience bowed their heads in prayer. A Houston Chronicle reporter later wrote, "Ethan Bennett isn't afraid of conviction. He's only afraid of no one watching him. The courtroom is his stage, and every angry or pitying glance is an invisible round of applause, feeding him." Throughout the trial, those notes proved true, bit by bit. When Maria mentioned the victims, Ethan smiled. When images of his sister's body were shown, he tilted his head, as if admiring a painting. Every frown from the audience, every stifled sob, seemed to only satisfy him more. Maria Dorsey, who faced him for 6 straight days, began to realize the most terrifying thing wasn't the crime itself, but his demeanor. While others saw a killer, Ethan saw an audience. Each time a camera flash lit up, he raised his head, letting a faint smile bloom at just the right moment. That smile wasn't wide, wasn't fake, just enough to send chills down spines. At the end of the session, as the judge called a recess, Maria stood still at the prosecution table. Ethan was led out, through the side hallway. As he passed, she called softly, her voice low enough for just the two of them. "Justice won't bow to that smile, Ethan." He paused for half a second, then turned, his eyes glinting lightly like reflected metal. "I don't need justice," Ethan replied quietly. "I just need them to remember me." The door slammed shut behind him, leaving the room steeped in silence. Maria looked down at her hands, trembling slightly, but her gaze remained steady. She knew some cases don't end when the gavel falls. People like Ethan Bennett, no matter their sentence, live on in the collective dread of a community, And that smile, that inhuman smile, would haunt them all for a long time, like a wound that never heals. On the morning of November 22, 2004, Waco's sky was overcast, clouds hanging so low they seemed to press down on the McLennan County Courthouse. No one spoke loudly, only the steady clack of police boots echoed on the old stone floor. In the courtroom, faces were weary and somber after nearly 2 weeks of trial. Judge Robert Haynes took the bench, striking his gavel 3 times. The People's Court of Texas resumes the trial of State of Texas versus Ethan Mark Bennett to hear the jury's final verdict. The room stood as the left door opened. Ethan Bennett entered, still in a crisp white shirt, wrists cuffed but head held high, eyes cold as steel. The air grew heavy as he sat. At the prosecution table, Maria Dorsey gripped her file, her gaze resolute. In the audience, Ruth Miller, the Bennett's neighbor, clutched a hand of the person beside her, whispering a prayer. The court clerk read the charges one last time. Defendant Ethan Mark Bennett, 16 years old, is charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, with intent, using a deadly weapon. The jury has deliberated in private for 10 hours. The room fell silent. The judge turned to the jury, asking, "Have you reached a unanimous verdict?" The jury foreman, a silver-haired man with a grave demeanor, stood, voice firm. "Your Honor, we have reached a unanimous decision. Ethan Mark Bennett is guilty of first-degree murder." A sharp gasp rose from the back, followed by stifled sobs. Maria closed her eyes for a second, then nodded slightly. Lawson, who had followed the case from the start, sat quietly in the corner, his eyes reflecting a mix of pain and exhaustion. Judge Haynes adjusted his glasses, his voice stern. "Defendant Ethan Mark Bennett, please rise." Ethan stood, calm, his gaze sweeping the room as if bidding farewell to a performance. After reviewing the evidence, witness testimonies, and psychological reports, Haynes read slowly, each word echoing in the courtroom. This court, on behalf of the state of Texas, sentences Ethan Mark Bennett to life imprisonment without parole. You will be held in a juvenile correctional facility until you are of age to transfer to a state prison. Sharp breaths, a few coughs, then utter silence. Maria bowed her head, hands clasped, while the jury sat still, none looking toward the defendant. Ethan stood there, lips curving slightly into a slow, small but clear smile. He didn't question, didn't protest, didn't show fear. His eyes reflected the white light above, cold and alien. "Do you have anything to say before the court concludes?" the judge asked. The room held its breath. Ethan tilted his head, smile still there, then spoke softly. His voice so quiet the microphone had to amplify it. "At least now, everything's quiet." A murmur spread, then stopped. Maria Dorsey stared at him, lips pressed tight. Judge Haynes looked up, his gaze hardening. He leaned back, voice low like thunder. "No, Ethan, you don't know what quiet is. You've just stepped into the silence of hell." Those words fell on the room like a final blade. Ethan closed his eyes for a second, still smiling faintly, as if the statement were, to him, just an intriguing prophecy. 2 officers approached, cuffing his hands. As they led Ethan through the audience, angry, pitying, and horrified eyes followed. He didn't lower his head. A reporter captured the moment. The flash lit up as Ethan glanced back, lips moving to say something no one could hear. That photo would appear on the front page of the Waco Tribune-Herald the next day, with the headline, "The Last Smile, the Final Smile of Waco's Youngest Killer." Maria Dorsey watched him go, feeling not triumph, but a heavy void. Lawson came to her side, saying quietly, "We did what we could," she replied, eyes still on the door. Justice was served. But quiet, no, never. Outside, rain began to fall, heavy drops hitting the courthouse's old stone steps. And somewhere, in the cold cell where he was headed, Ethan Mark Bennett would likely sit, staring at the wall, smiling at the silence he created, unaware that what surrounded him wasn't peace, but eternity. The Waco story of 2004 wasn't just a tragedy closed by a life sentence. It struck the very American nerves of today: quiet suburban homes like Maple Hill, a Glock handgun in a safe, a high-achieving but cold child, and a community both outraged and captivated by the Waco smile. From it, a few practical lessons emerge. First, gun safety isn't an abstract slogan. Ethan knew the safe's code and took the Glock 9mm without resistance. If guns and ammo were stored separately, double-locked with regular code changes and adult checks, the chain of events: 1:17 a.m., left home; 1:30 a.m., dumped gun at riverbank, might have been stopped early. Second, subtle signals must be taken seriously. A friend hearing wanting to know what killing feels like, a teacher reading an essay denying morality, a neighbor seeing a boy sit motionless like a stranger at his own window, those were chances for early intervention. In America today, parents and schools could set up a three-way hotline to clinically screen any alarming statements or writings instead of dismissing them as teenage phases. Third, a culture of achievement plus emotional silence is the perfect breeding ground for the emptiness Ranger Lawson described. He didn't kill out of hate, he killed out of emptiness. Busy American families could start with a small ritual: 15 minutes of no-phone check-in each night, asking 3 questions: what made you happiest today? What frustrated you most? And what do you need help with now? Finally, don't unwittingly give a stage to darkness. The reporter wrote, Ethan didn't fear conviction. He feared no one watching. When communities discuss responsibly, we honor the lost while reducing the motive to seek attention through violence. Justice must ring out, but conscience must speak sooner, before a child chooses silence through gunfire. If you believe justice lies not only in verdicts, but also in understanding and vigilance in every family, please subscribe to the channel to join us in exploring the true stories behind the darkness of crime. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video, where we face the truth together, so no tragedy repeats in silence.